There's so many different ways of growing orchids, and one of the popular materials to use in growing them is bark. And in today's video, I'm going to share the different kinds of bark from cheapest to most expensive. I'm going to share everything I've learned in using it and some of the pros and cons for the different types. So at the end of this video, you'll know what kinds of bark to use. I'm going to share my approach to using it. More expensive doesn't always mean better all the time. And some options for you depending on your budget and what you're trying to do. So let's get right into it. So orchid bark, why do we grow orchids in bark? Well, bark provides drainage for orchids. They're epiphytes. In nature, they grow on trees. So bark kind of mimics that in a pot, right? So it gives roots lots of air, lots of aeration. Bark holds moisture, but also gives air. So it's a good medium compared to soil, which would suffocate and kill an orchid. Bark gives that aeration, but holds that moisture. Bark also breaks down slowly over time. It's organic matter, and as you water it, it will break down. Let's jump right into the most popular kind. So there's fir tree bark. So it comes from the Douglas fir tree. It tends to break down faster than all other kinds that I'm aware of. So typically it's good for 1 to 2 years, depending on the processing and whatnot. It's a very common general potting mix. There's nothing wrong with using it. I started out using this stuff and I'd still use it for some applications. I would use this if you repot more frequently. So I have a Richard Mueller hybrid back there. That's my rustic spots. And I have to repot my Richard Muellers quite often. Now, I use a different kind because I up pot a lot. But if I'm going to take something out of a pot pretty quickly, if I know it's a seedling and I want to get it out and put it in a new pot later, within a year, within 2 years, this is perfectly fine. Now, there's some drawbacks to this. So you do get what you pay for typically, but it's not always bad. But let me share some of the drawbacks for fir tree bark. So sometimes it holds on to way too much moisture. So some people buy this and they'll add perlite or other amendments to add more aeration to the mix because sometimes they will hold a lot of moisture. Also, depending on how it's stored, your bag may have like fungus gnats or something like that. Like if Home Depot stored it around a pool of water or something, there's sometimes complaints that there were fungus gnats. So this stuff is not usually sterilized. That said, it's really, really cheap and you could sterilize it yourself. So we'll get into that at the end of the video. Fir tree bark is fine. Like it's the cheapest stuff that you can get. You can use it, but the drawbacks are it will break down faster on you, so you're going to have to repot more. And you want to watch out for the quality. I've also noticed that with the quality, if you'll get different size pieces. So if you want something coarse, you may not always get coarse pieces of bark. You're going to get a mixture of some really big pieces, some really small pieces. I'm going to actually show you. I got this fir tree bark from Supermoss. It's pretty good, but there's just so many different sizes, and that's okay. Like you can manually sort them, but I bought this huge box just because I wanted to get through repotting quickly. I got it on Amazon, and it was totally fine. Anyway, let's move on to pine bark. So pine bark comes from soft pines. It tends to be a little bit chunkier than fir tree bark, but the quality can vary a lot depending on where you get it from. I don't remember using pine tree bark, but it is a common kind of bark. I read that it's less absorbent than pine bark, so you're going to have less issues with it. You probably won't need as many amendments with this. And it's slower to break down than fir bark. So typically 2 to 3 years for it to break down. And it really, the quality of this stuff depends on where you get it from, how they process it, how they cut it up. So it varies. If you use pine bark, let me know down below. I'd love to hear your experience on this. Now, the bark that I use and that I prefer is kiwi bark. So kiwi bark is from the New Zealand Pinus radiata tree. And it's a really good mixture. So this stuff lasts longer. I use it on most of my repots. And this is processed bark. So It's long lasting and it's sterilized. So you're not going to have fungus gnats like the fir tree bark sometimes has. It was sterilized, it was processed. It's higher quality than pine bark and fir tree bark. It's also aged. This stuff breaks down very slowly. It can last 3 to 4, even 5 years. So it's pretty good. I use it because I like to up pot my orchids. This orchid right here, I up potted it. I just took it and put it from one pot to another pot. So if you up pot a lot, using better quality is more prudent in those cases because you don't want it to break down on you. I'm very happy with Kiwi Bark. I get mine from Sunset Valley Orchids. I just email the owner of Sunset Valley Orchids, ask for a quote. The most expensive part of it is the shipping because it's quite heavy. So I buy it in bulk because I have a huge collection and it just doesn't make sense for me to buy 20 bags of random Better Grow, if that makes sense. But for the quality, the price is pretty good. It's just mostly like the shipping cost from Sunset Valley Orchids. And it was a viewer, Michael, who put me onto this. And I really, really like this stuff. Most of my orchids are in it. Now, if you want the most premium kind of orchid bark, there's Orchiata Bark. Orchiata bark comes from the same tree, the Pinus, the New Zealand Pinus radiata tree. It's aged and treated. It's very consistent and long lasting. So if you buy coarse, generally you're getting uniform sizes. If you're getting smaller kinds of bark, you're getting the same kind of size. It's very consistent and you can get it in different size. It holds its shape and structure a lot longer than the other kinds of bark. And it's ready to use right out of the bag. So you don't have to do anything to it. It's sterilized. It was processed. You're not going to deal with fungus gnats. It's very clean and it's ready to go. I used to use Orchiata bark in a mixture. So I used to use Repot Me mixes. It got too expensive for me when I expanded my collection significantly. Their mixes are they're very premium. They're very pricey, but that stuff it takes a long time to break down. And the Repot Me mixes are really good. But I find with Orchiata and Kiwi Bark, you don't really need amendments or anything like that because they're not gonna hold on to so much moisture like Fir Tree Bark. So you don't need as many amendments. And that said, it's already treated and processed right out of the bag. So you don't have to do anything further. For the other types, you kind of do, and I'll share more at the end. You don't have to soak Orchiata bark like you have to do with some other kinds of bark. You actually don't have to do it, but let's get into soaking right now. So some growers, they soak their fir bark or their pine bark because it doesn't retain that much moisture initially. I don't do it because I use a lot of sphagnum moss in my mixes. In my climate, I just find that my pots dry out fast, so adding moss helps retain moisture. And because I do that, I feel like in the beginning I don't have to. You don't have to either, but it's a good idea if you're only using bark to do it to make sure that it absorbs water right away. Because if not, in the beginning, it'll take time to hold on to the water, if that makes sense. So it can be helpful because initially some mixes or some kinds of bark will repel moisture, and I'm talking more about pine bark and fir tree bark. Kiwi bark, it's optional. I find that it holds on to moisture pretty quickly, and then with Orchiata bark, it's already been treated, so it's ready to use out of the bag, and you don't have to soak it. Different kinds of bark. So you could always get fine, medium, or coarse bark, and then for fine bark, that's more for seedlings or orchids with like thinner roots like oncidiums or something that's more moisture retentive. Think like a Miltoniopsis could use fine bark as well because it likes moisture more. The roots can be a little bit more on the thin side. Medium and coarse is more for your Cattleyas, your Vandas, some of your Dendrobiums when they're a little bit bigger. And then the coarseness also depends on the pot size. So the bigger your pot, the more moisture it generally holds, the longer it takes to dry. So if you have a big pot, you're going to want more coarse bark. I typically use medium bark. My pots are usually not more than 6 inches. And it works out well for me. And I tend to divide my orchids before they get super big just because I have limited space. Sterilizing bark. So as I mentioned, some bags will have fungus gnats. Not always, but sometimes. It's happened to me where I bring a bag home and it has fungus gnats, and I have to, I just see them for days in my apartment. So you could combat that by sterilizing your bark. So you could bake it if you want at 200 to 250 degrees. Don't leave it unattended. But you could take a baking sheet specifically for your orchid stuff or your plant stuff. You can bake it for half an hour, and that will kill any fungus gnats or any mold spores or anything like that, but it'll give you some peace of mind just in case. I've been there, and having a bunch of fungus gnats all over, it's not great. You could also boil your bark when you first get it. I'm talking more about the cheaper stuff. If you're unsure, you can boil it as well. Boil it for 15-20 minutes, and it'll kill any fungus gnats, any mold spores in there. But then you have to let it dry before you store it. Generally, you want to store your bark in something that's breathable so it doesn't harbor any mold, just in case you didn't sterilize it. It's just a general best practice. So what's my strategy for bark? Well, it depends on the orchid. Let me show you two of them. So this is my BLC rustic spots. This is a very vigorous orchid. I up potted it. I used cheap pine bark when I up potted it, but underneath that was more expensive kiwi bark. So I know that the kiwi bark is going to take a long time to break down, and then the pine bark around it is going to be fine for about a year or two. So this orchid more than doubles in size every year. I kind of have to repot it or divide it every year anyway. So when I take it out of the pot next, it's going to be divided, and then I'll get rid of the pine bark. So you can use cheap stuff if you're going to be repotting more frequently and something very vigorous. If you're going to repot it within a year or two anyway, using the cheap stuff is perfectly fine. On the other hand, this is my Cattleya dowiana. It's a huge orchid. It grows very slowly. This one, I don't want to disturb the roots. I have this in kiwi bark. It's got a really nice root system. When I pot it up next year, I'm probably going to up pot it because I don't want to disturb that root system, because species Cattleyas can be a little bit more finicky. And Cyclias, as I shared a few weeks ago, they can be a little bit more finicky. So something like that, I'm going to err on the side of being more conservative, and then I'll use more expensive bark for plants like that. There's nothing wrong with the cheaper stuff or the more expensive stuff, but I like to reserve more expensive bark for species like the dowiana. That said, that kiwi bark that I mentioned is not expensive at all. I think it was $35 for a big, I forgot how much. I'll put it down below. But the most expensive part was the shipping. But if you live near somewhere that sells it and you can pick it up, if you could buy it in bulk, it's not that bad. And I highly recommend it. That said, a very large bag, I think a 35-liter bag of Orchiata bark is $90. If you could get it someplace where shipping is free, like Amazon, I think it's worth it if you have a big collection and you have a lot of orchids that you don't want to repot that often. So I really like Orchiata bark. I linked it down below if you want to check it out. It's good stuff. It's darker. It lasts a lot longer. And if you just want to up pot, make sure, be mindful if you use moss like I do. I like to go in and fish for some of it. So I'll kind of empty the pot a little bit, dump it, and then fish for the pieces of sphagnum moss because those can degrade a lot faster. Then I put the bark back in. I do it without taking it out of the pot. I just knock some stuff out and then fish for whatever moss I can. Get it out, then get some fresh moss in there, then up pot. If you have any questions, let me know down below. But yeah, those are the most common kinds of bark. There's also coconut husk, which is very cheap. You can use that as well. It's not bark. You could get reptile coconut husk. I have a video that you could check out right here on how to prepare it. That stuff is cheap. It works well. You don't have to spend a ton of money to grow orchids successfully. More expensive premium stuff is great, but you don't need it. Unless something's going to stay in a pot for many years. And in my case, like this orchid, This is so vigorous. I love these Richard Mueller hybrids. They just grow so fast that it's not, sometimes when I'm repotting and I have to get it out of a pot, I feel bad because if I'm using Orchiata bark, I'm like, I just potted you up and now I have to pot it again. You know what I mean? So in that case, it doesn't make sense. Anyway, let me know your comments down below. I hope this video was helpful and I'll see you in the next one. Bye everyone.